Good afternoon, everyone. This is the March 8th, 2024 meeting of the Legislative Study Commission on the Environmental and Health Effects of Per and polyfluorinated compounds. We are presently starting with 8 members present, and which is less than a quorum, so this will not be an official meeting unless we have at least 2 additional people join us. So we are going to skip over minutes. Okay, one more. Good afternoon, Mindy. Still one shy of a quorum, so we're going forward with an update from Mike Wimsatt. Mike, can you give us your DES update?
Sure, thank you, Chris. So good afternoon, everybody. So for the DES update, I want to start by answering some of the questions that were posed from Representative Rung and others at the last meeting, and I think maybe one prior meeting. First of all, and this will be included in my notes for this meeting, which I'll supply to Representative Rung. So first of all, Representative Rung had a question about the number of properties that are on bottled water and how many have been on bottled water for 3 or more years. And we were trying to pull that information together from St. Gobain's consultant. And I will tell you, I've got some numbers here that I think are pretty reliable and others that are, I think they're definitely in the ballpark, but they don't necessarily add up to the individual ones. So I want to reserve the right to provide maybe some updated numbers in the future if necessary. I'm always nervous when they give us numbers like, 527 and 413, and then I add up and it doesn't add up. And then I'm like, well, if I give you a number like that, it makes it sound like it's a pretty precise number. And so anyways, this is the best that I can do right now. And if I get further information that amends this or augments it, then I'll be sure to share it. So of the approximately 1,120 properties that have been offered bottled water since September 20th of 2019, and the work plan for residential well sampling that was submitted at that time, there are currently 506 properties that are actively receiving bottled water. 527 have discontinued services, and that means they've had a POET installed and confirmed operative, or they've canceled for whatever reason. And then 85 properties that were non-responsive or refused service. DES has not been provided with complete data yet on the length of time that properties have been on bottled water. We do know that all identified properties, other than in Londonderry, are expected to receive a final alternate water solution in this calendar year, 2024. So of the 249 properties in Londonderry that are currently being still evaluated for a potential water line connection, 166 of those have been receiving bottled water for more than 3 years, 65 properties for between 2 and 3 years, and 3 properties between 1 and 2 years, and then 15 properties for less than 1 year. So I think those numbers are pretty reliable. But they don't necessarily tell the whole story. And when I get further information, I'll be happy to provide that. There were also some questions about the 30% of properties that have not responded to the access agreement letters or not returned them. And also a concern about whether subsequent purchase of properties are being put on notice or are learning about the concerns. So looking back in April of 21, DES provided a draft template letter for use by municipalities. We had this conversation at this group, several years ago, and we provided that template letter to some of the affected municipalities. I don't actually have any information regarding which municipalities elected to use that template letter or some other version to reach out to their citizens. I believe Merrimack was one that did so, but I don't have the details on that. DES, let's see, where was I? So in May of 21, DES also sent out letters to all the properties located within 500 feet of properties that had already had exceedances identified. That's in accordance with statutory requirements for notification. And so setting that as sort of for context, we've been coordinating with St. Gobain and their consultant, WSP, to get additional correspondence out on these fronts. We're working to send out notification letters to property owners that have not previously responded to sample requests from the company. And this will include all properties that have not responded to ensure potentially new property owners are notified. We anticipate getting notification letters out to property owners this month, so by the end of March. We also will be working to notify property owners that have not been responsive to alternate water requests. This includes properties that have not responded to requests from the water utility for municipal water line connections, and properties that have not responded to the POET contractor for installation of POETs. We expect this correspondence also to go out by the end of this month. There was also a question from a prior meeting about the number of properties that fall in the category of water exhibiting concentrations between 4 parts per trillion and 12 parts per trillion for PFOA. And based on a quick search, there are approximately 900 properties that fall under this category. That is not a precise number. I think it's definitely in the ballpark. And if desired, we can obtain a more precise number for the next meeting. So that, I think, addresses the questions that were sort of outstanding and had been out there. And with that, I will proceed to the usual format for the update. Starting with the Air Resources Division, as we usually do. The annual stack test took place, as you all know, back in September of last year. 2 DES staff members were present to observe that, and everything seemed to go in accordance with the pre-test protocol. A final report was submitted to DES in November, and that report has been reviewed and approved by the department. Spoke with Kathy Beam today, and I think the letter that went out to confirm that has been sent, but it isn't uploaded to OneStop yet. So as soon as I have a link, I will. What I'll do is I'll hold on to these notes, and then once that link is up and running in the next few days, we'll get it integrated into this, so that when you get the notes for this meeting, you'll have a link to that document. Regarding the facility closure, we've certainly talked about this, and then the notification we got back in August that the facility was planning to close. St. Gobain's contractor has notified, oh, sorry, I'm on the wrong page here. Oh, okay, there we go. So we understand currently, as I think I've reported earlier, their expectation was to wind up their operations this calendar year. They had expected that they would be ceasing manufacturing operations by the end of the first quarter of this year, which traditionally would be considered the end of this month, end of March. Our understanding is that they have indeed completed any manufacturing coating operations involving PFAS and the towers and such that are responsible for the former emissions from the facility. So our understanding is that those manufacturing activities have been concluded. I think they have some other converting and other activities they're still completing that don't necessarily involve the towers or PFAS emissions. So my understanding is that from talking with Chris Angier, is that the RTO is still operating, even though there are no specific emissions being directed to it from the towers. But for HVAC reasons, they are continuing to operate that. I still think they expect to complete all of their manufacturing operations by the end of the quarter, and certainly by the next meeting, if I've received that information, I'll be sure to share that. We are still awaiting a letter from them that outlines their plans for closure. We thought we'd have that by now, but we don't have it, so we're certainly hoping. We've sort of made it clear that we want to get that, and we're told that we should expect to get it sometime this month. So that's where we're at on that. Moving on to our typical division update. As you know, we've got 2 contractors, Second Wind Water Systems and Culligan, working on POET systems. Second Wind has generally been doing POET systems installations in the towns of Bedford and Merrimack, and Culligan is doing them in Londonderry, Litchfield, and Hudson. And at this time, all homeowners have been notified of their eligibility to set up the pre-installation inspection. The first POET system was installed back in December of 22, and as of March 7th of this year, so yesterday, 596 POET systems have been installed. At this time, the contractors have been able to install nearly all the POET systems for property owners where the property owners were responsive to the initial contractor notification letters. And their contractors notified properties listed under term sheet attachments 11 to 18. So as previously noted, DES will be working to notify property owners that have not been responsive to Saint-Gobain's offer for POETs. As I think you know, due to the requirements of the work plan, wherein they don't just install the system, but they need to then do confirmation sampling to assure that it's fully operational and effective. Approximately 550 POET systems are considered officially complete because they've made all those confirmations. At this point, I think they have on the order of, well, I don't know exactly how many or what phase they're in. Some of them, many of them have probably been installed, but still not entirely completed and confirmed. The contractors have begun periodic maintenance on POET systems in accordance with their point of entry treatment system work plan. And we anticipate receiving a report. We've requested that they give us a sort of a compiled report on this by the end of April, and they've agreed to do that. So we expect to receive that report, and we'll certainly share the results and a link to that once we receive it. Regarding the rebate program, the POET system rebate program that Saint-Gobain is operating, they notified residents of their eligibility status in February of this year, and the letters provided directions on how to set up the process to be issued payments by Saint-Gobain. The company has indicated that several residents started the vendor payment process, but no payments have actually been issued yet. So I expect that in the coming months we'll be seeing there's only about somewhere on the order between 30 and 40, I think, reimbursement requests. So I would expect to see those processed fairly promptly, and we should be able to report on those over the next couple of months. Regarding the design and construction work for water line installations, as of February 29th, approximately 3,900 feet of 8-inch water main, 4,200 feet of 12-inch water main, and 125 feet of 14-inch water main have been installed. That's mostly related to the Litchfield work in the areas of Rocky Hill Road, Shirley Way, Muscovy Drive, and Hillcrest Road. Contractors are currently working on non-town roads due to the winter moratorium, because the roads, we are in early spring here, and the roads are getting posted for weight limits. So they're currently working on non-town roads due to the winter moratorium, and will resume work on town roads in April when the postings are lifted. There's approximately 3,500 feet of water main remaining to be installed for this project. The water utility began exterior tasks for water service connections and anticipates that plumbing for connections will start in March of 2024 of this month. The contractors have estimated this work will take approximately 6 months to complete. The water utility has received 49 responses from 78 properties contacted. 15 of these responses indicate that they will decline the service connection, and we'll be working to notify residents that have not been responsive to the offer of the public water connection to see if we can be of assistance in any way. And some of this is repeating from last time, but I'll just review it anyways. The company's been working with the utility company to complete the design for service connections to existing water mains in the towns of Bedford and Londonderry. Bids have been received for this work, and the water utility has selected and awarded the work to a contractor. Saint-Gobain is working to finalize contract documents and estimates that work will begin this spring. The consultant has finalized design packages for extensions and connections to existing water mains for the Merrimack area, including Wildcat, Brenda Lane, and those service connections. The bid process was closed in December, and the company has selected a contractor and awarded the work. It's likely that work will be started in the spring of this year. Both projects are estimated to take approximately 3 to 4 months and be completed by the fall. Saint-Gobain is working with a water utility in the town of Londonderry to evaluate the feasibility of water line extensions in that town. The conceptual design was completed by the water utility on behalf of the company at the end of April of 2023. DES has met with St. Gobain, the town of Londonderry, and the water utility back in November to discuss the expanded water service in this area. Londonderry has applied for supplemental funding to assist in the long-term expansion of municipal water in the town. Londonderry has a very appropriate and keen interest in trying to, take advantage of what's going on here and extend water further than what would just be done by St. Gobain, and to try to work with them to try to, get some synergies in terms of cost savings and getting as much as possible in the way of water system expansion, given the circumstances. They're still working on that, and I know they've got some important some of the funds that they have acquired or have access to through ARPA or other means. And I think they've got some warrants on their town warrant for town meeting to try to address that. So we're certainly hopeful. It's really great to see what Londonderry is doing. They're being very thoughtful about this, and we certainly hope that they're successful in their town meeting this month. Let's see, on April 6th of 23, DES received a letter from St. Gobain that proposed to delay the submittal of an application for groundwater management permit until the completion of a second set of PFAS samples from all drinking water wells at the site. DES concurred that made sense, and we issued an approval letter back in May of 23 and requested the application for the groundwater management permit be submitted by May of this year, which we still expect to have happen. And St. Gobain's consultants started collection of the second samples in June, and we'll talk a little bit about where they're at on that in the next section. Also, DES has been periodically receiving updated proposals from the company to remedy additional water supply wells within the consent decree area following the initial agreements in April and June of 22. This includes term sheet attachment 19, which was received and reviewed by DES this month. And this attachment includes an updated list of remedies for all properties since the April 22 proposal. We anticipate a new proposal would be submitted by the company in May of this year. And then moving on to water supply sampling. So I always try to include, just to keep folks updated, I've repeated this several times now, it's not new information, but the statistics associated with the resampling and what we see for that. So I won't necessarily go over that now, but that'll still be in the notes that I provide. I do want to note that, let's see. So Golder started the effort, WSP started the effort to collect a second set of samples from all the wells previously sampled only once that exhibited results from below the detection limit to 10 micrograms per liter, or excuse me, nanograms per liter, or parts per trillion. As of the 1st of February of this year, the second samples have been collected from approximately 1,130 properties, which represents about 95% of the targeted properties for resampling. The laboratory analytical results for the second samples from properties that exhibited results from below the 10 parts per trillion originally have indicated that between 5 and 10% of the resampled properties have exhibited exceedances of a drinking water standard. So these properties have been issued bottled water eligibility letters and will be incorporated into plans to get them a final alternate water solution. So regarding previously unsampled wells within the CD, reported for a number of months now that we've been pressing the company to do additional sampling, within the CD area for wells that have not yet been sampled. They've been stubborn about that. They've elected to follow the procedure that they've been following right along. We have a disagreement with them on this. So we are proceeding with completing sampling at the remaining homes within that outer boundary of the consent agreement that St. Gobain has not yet offered to sample. And we anticipate that it'll take 2 to 3 months to complete this effort. We weren't able to start it as early as we wished to because of some other very pressing needs and for work from our samplers. But we do expect to get to that shortly, and we'll complete that work as promptly as we can. So to update from the latest numbers we have, there's some minor changes from the statistics that I reported last month. As of February 29th, so just about a week ago, and this is updated through to reflect addendum 18. 3,867 properties have been identified for sampling. That's no change. 3,856 access agreements have been sent. No change there. 2,476 samples have been collected from water supply wells. That's 3 more than the January report. And 1,135 second samples collected from water supply wells. And that includes 964 samples collected since June of 23. And then 1,123 properties have been offered bottled water, and that's 2 more than the January report. So lastly, with regard to the site investigation, as I've reported for a number of months now, a remedial action plan, or a RAP, was submitted to DES back in May of last year. We met with Saint-Gobain and their consultant in June of last year and expressed some concerns about the content. They decided to submit a RAP addendum following those discussions. DES met with the company and their representatives in December of this year to discuss the contents of the new RAP addendum that they submitted. That was submitted, well, I take it back. We met with them in December. We didn't have a RAP addendum in hand, but we were able to talk about what they were planning to submit. They went ahead and submitted that in February, on February 9th. And I have to note that it has not addressed our concerns. It is still very much the same as what was presented earlier. So we're pretty disappointed with that. We are still working on reviewing it and commenting on it in writing. So I don't want to say too much more about it at this point, but I do want to let the group know that that remedial action plan really doesn't reflect what we thought we were going to see when they agreed to submit an addendum. And I think that's what I've got. So happy to take any questions.
I just want to note for the record, we achieved a quorum at 2:10.
Right. I can feel it.
So, question for Mr. Wimsatt. Rosemary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mike, has Saint-Gobain indicated what the post-closure use of that site's going to be?
No, I don't think they know. I think my understanding is that they intend to really remove everything. The only, and I've talked about this a little bit before, they expect to remove all the manufacturing equipment, the towers, other equipment they use for conversion, and the RTO. They plan to essentially, as I understand it, decommission the underground plumbing at the facility. And the only sort of components of the facility that I think they intend to leave there are the wastewater treatment plant, because they did invest some significant funds, and there's quite a fairly robust wastewater system there that they actually think a new user might be interested in having access to. They told us they plan to go through significant decontamination procedures to ensure that that plant infrastructure doesn't have any PFAS contamination in it. But that's really the only thing that they, as I understand it, that they intend to leave behind. My understanding is that they would likely market the facility. It's not my understanding they have any interest in using it for company purposes, and that they would look to put it on the market at some point. Okay,
and then I have another question. You mentioned about some of the resampling that was done and that the amount of, I'm assuming, PFOA has increased. Has DES mapped this to see if there's a trend in when the second sampling is increasing from the first? Does that give any indication of any increased leaching of PFOA or expansion of the bloom?
I think that question's been, yeah, I do. The question's been asked. I think the chair has asked that a question very similar to that. And I've talked with staff about it. And I think the general perception is that no, that they don't necessarily see any trend there. And the problem is that, we're talking about, we're right around the levels that are flirting with the detection levels of the reporting levels of the analysis. So, if you're talking about parts per thousand or maybe even parts per million, and you say you went from 4 to 12 or something like that, it could mean quite a bit. I'm not sure that, something that tests at 5 today and tested 11 tomorrow. We're not really sure how much that really means. And you know, and we don't have a lot of repeat sampling to look at to sort of get a sense for what do we expect the variability in a given well to be. You know, this is kind of a new area for us. We've been looking at you know, we've been monitoring in the parts per billion range, lots of wells at hundreds of sites around the state for years. And it's not too uncommon to see a few part per billion fluctuation. It could be seasonal, could just be, you know, vagaries of the analysis, could be any number of things. But when you start talking about, you know, a difference of a few parts per trillion, really, and our staff are really not confident that means that there's much in the way of trends that could be determined from that, or conclusions about, you know, the lay of the land or locations or things like that. I mean, I think we'll probably be able to say more about that in a few years when we have more sampling under our belt. But right now, I think our staff are really reluctant to try to draw any meaningful conclusions from that.
Okay, thanks. And then one more question. I know I've asked this before, but I don't know if it's all been resolved yet. But do you remember all those properties in South Merrimack where Saint-Gobain was not taking, they were bringing in questions about whether they should have responsibility? I believe these were residences that were within the outer boundary. And there was some discrepancy about moving forward on those. Have all of those been resolved yet?
You know, I hesitate to answer that. Andy is much more facile with that information than I am. And if you could give me the street addresses or the general neighborhood area, we can run that to ground for you and get you an answer. But I'm really not sure. I mean, there's certainly areas where they've elected not to sample because they've asserted that there's another potential source in the area. And we have a fundamental difference of agreement on their approach to that. But in terms of, you know, to answer your question, I'd really need to know which addresses you're talking about, and then I can get you a direct answer.
Well, it's actually the ones that you're talking about, the ones where Saint-Gobain was questioning whether they should assume responsibility. Those were properties that were like in limbo. They've been in limbo for years, I think.
Well,
And
again,
I don't know if they've all been resolved yet. Has Saint-Gobain and DES reached an agreement about the resolution of that?
I think the answer is for some of them, yes. I mean, I think that if I remember correctly, and again, I'm not as close to this as others, but you know, Brenda Lane and Wildcat Falls was an area where they were trying to make some arguments, but they are providing alternate water there. So there are places where we've reached an agreement where they agreed to provide an alternate water solution, but I wouldn't go so far as to say that's happened everywhere.
Yeah, I think these were, there was some question about whether they would be, TCI was a polluter. So it was sort of in that area closer to the Hollis line from Merrimack. You know, I can follow up with Andy. It's just,
yeah, I think that would be, I don't want to lead you astray because I really don't know the answer to, you know, and I think Andy's going to need to know specifically which street addresses you're talking about so that we can give you a direct answer for each of those addresses.
Okay, thank you.
Maureen.
Just two areas of question. One is when we're reporting numbers, it occurred to me today that the compilation reports that they're giving you and that we're referring to and the numbers that we're talking about are truly 2019 fall on. So it almost seems like we reset, you know, it's the same investigation. So it may not matter as much to you because you're following through on the current work plan, and I understand that. But as a resident here, you know, we've seen this pattern from the start of minimization on record that corporations really like for their shareholders. I think it would be really helpful when we talk about the numbers to count the wells from the very beginning, because you know they were a lot before 2019. And you know, I know what you're saying. You're reporting on the current work plans, and I appreciate that. But I just a reminder, maybe just it's validating to communities to hear the total sum.
Absolutely.
I think you.
Yeah, no. I really appreciate that question, Maureen, because, you know, this has been a frustration of mine too, is like, there's so many different ways to slice this data and talk about it that it becomes very confusing, even for us who we have access to the information.
Yes,
So,
because you're dealing
you know,
with
we have, over time, we've compiled the broader, more, you know, like, I mean, you know, what's lost in this is that before we even had a consent decree, we had St. Gobain extending water line to 400 homes in Litchfield, right? And so, yeah, that I agree is very, it's helpful to keep that in context and perspective. So certainly be happy to, you know, get with Andy and try to get maybe for the next report, a more comprehensive review of the data.
So
to
the
help.
folks here in Merrimack, you know, we know this is our 8-year anniversary. And I remember way in that first year being told there's only 13 private wells in Merrimack that are impacted. Ha ha ha, right? So, and then this denial of about 45 homes in the Knollwood Ave area, I believe, that weren't even being reported on in their official reports because they were in charge of giving those reports. And we knew they existed based on the current DES maps. That, remember in the beginning, they actually identified addresses and you could look it up. And I had this yellow pad with all these addresses and I'm bringing it to the town council and they're like, where are you getting your information? It doesn't match what we're being told. So we just have to be, you know, that's a sore spot for me. So that's area number 1. So thank you. Area number 2 is in the area of site investigation. I appreciate that you are clearly saying on record here that their most recent remediation action plan does not satisfy you. Yay, thank you. I love that. Way back when you did, or they did, you asked them to do, and the state did some of it too, the testing of the outfall pipes, the brook, the river, all of those data points, right? So now that manufacturing is winding down, it's interesting that they're saying that they've ended and it's going to be by the end of the month. I had heard from a worker only about a week ago that they were looking at the end of April. So I'm going to circle back with some workers, but who knows? So are we going
to? It could be. I want to just say that the information I have on that is anecdotal in the sense that I heard it from Chris Angier in a conversation. We don't have anything in writing about their schedule. My understanding is the manufacturing operations that are continuing are what, you know, I would call converting, where they've got product that they manufactured on the towers and they're stitching that, you know, or you know, who knows what. I mean, they got a lot of things going on there that aren't about necessarily the towers. And when they originally talked to us about this, they said they expected that be done by the end of the first quarter, but it may well extend into April. I'm not saying one way or the other because I don't have anything in writing.
And, you know, there's a long history here of, for whatever reason, what you're being told is not what we hear directly from local, you know, sources and things like that. So we just want to keep that in mind, and maybe I just like to get those things on record, just to say, too bad for you guys if you don't like listening to it, St. Gobain. I know you're listening. Just the little satisfaction I can take. Anyhow, back to the site investigation. When you look at, you know, the storm outfall and the various pipes that go into the river, I don't know, you know, the wastewater, you know, sanitary sewer internal design only does so much. We know there's still, you know, PFAS going into rivers and waterways. Will you ask that all those data points that you did through the years, will they all be revisited? Because the focus keeps going to, you know, more wells and more drinking water and meeting their obligation. But for residents, you know, we also care very much about the environmental contamination that affect many parts of or wellness and, or water sources that live forever.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, you know, to put this in context of our overall program, even before St. Gobain came along as a site, we have hundreds of hazardous waste sites in the state. And many of them, not by no means all of them, but a number of them have very significant contamination in the formation that, you know, candidly is going to take decades or more to resolve itself. Just because we get an approved remedial action plan doesn't mean that every remedial action plan, you know, guarantees to restore drinking the groundwater at the site to standards in 5 or 10 or even 20 years. We have a number of sites, you know, what I would call legacy sites that we've been monitoring, that we put, you know, robust remedial action plans that we were proud of, that we think were good plans, that still, just because of the nature of the contaminants we deal with, you know, prior to this, you know, sort of our big for many, many years, some of the most challenging contaminants we dealt with were chlorinated solids because they're dense. When they were released as a neat product, they sink in the water column, in the aquifer. They get into places in the aquifer and the pore space that are very difficult to get them out. And when you get a significant amount of it in the formation, no matter what you do, unless you dig up the whole thing and truck it away, which is frequently not practicable, you're not going to restore that groundwater to quality in a short period of time. It's going to take a long time, and that is fine. That's the reality of it. And of course, sometimes technologies come along that are better. That we can go back and revisit a site and get a better remedy. But for a lot of sites that we just know that they're going to be contaminated. No one's going to be drinking that water for a really long time. That doesn't mean that we don't strive to get a remedial action plan that makes significant improvements in the mass of contaminant and getting the mass contamination out and limiting the amount of continuing contamination of groundwater that occurs. And that's going to be true at this site too. I mean, it has to be said in terms of managing expectations here. There's not a remedy on the planet that we could implement at this site that is just going to somehow restore all the groundwater and soil at that site to meet standards in a short period of time. This is going to be a contaminated site for a very long time. Having said that, that is not an excuse or a reason to say, well, we don't have to do anything because we can't meet the standards, so what's the point? We've had responsible parties make that argument to us before, but it doesn't play that well. We expect there to be workmanlike efforts using the technology available and, subject to some practicability evaluations but to propose remedies and solutions that make a meaningful improvement in the conditions, even if it's not going to restore the site to meet standards quickly or even maybe ever. It still matters how much flux is going to Dumpling Brook. It matters how much is going to the groundwater from the soil at the site. It matters how much is leaving the formation and getting into the Merrimack River. And just because we don't anticipate that number is going to be zero or that it's going to meet the standards, we still want to see it reduced in a meaningful way. And, it has to be said, long after all of us on this call are gone, our successors here at the agency and members of your community are going to be paying attention to the site and keeping an eye on how it's doing. And if we do our job, then it'll be doing a lot better then than it is now. It won't be cleaned up more than likely, but it'll be a lot better. And it will pose less of a risk in the community and to the environment. So that's I guess the best way I could describe the way we deal with sites that are severely contaminated, and certainly this site falls into that category.
Well, I appreciate learning last year that DES was partnering with whatever that firm that was to do the pilot studies and work on destruction of PFAS. That's really nice to see New Hampshire on that list of places that are going to try to get involved there in the science. So that may be applied at some point. I think what bothers me and other residents is you only have so many phrases you can legally and officially use. That's your language, not my language. But from a community perspective, when we see the phrase, natural attenuation, there has to be a better phrase when it comes to this site investigation. And it's not realistic, to say it's all cleaned up. I do realize that. But when we say natural attenuation, it feels like people that they don't realize that effort is being made to look at every source and try to reduce as much as possible. It just looks like a little bit of, oh, well, someday it'll be gone. There's nothing we can do. I wish there was a way that we could wordsmith that in some way that would just feel, I don't know what that word is, because that phrase, I know why it's applied to certain sites and Superfund sites and monitoring. We have many sites all over Merrimack, as you know, and we know this too, that have ground monitoring wells, way more than we realized. But that is a plan. When that's the plan on record, we're in a sticky place, I think, as a nation on that. So
yeah, I will say that natural attenuation, whether you like the term or not, does play a role in virtually every remedy that we approve, but it's typically a component of a larger remedy. And monitored natural attenuation, or MNA, is the lingo that's used, which means we monitor it and keep an eye. And the idea of that is that we try to get responsible parties to do whatever is appropriate and practicable to try to reduce the total amount of source material at the site. understanding that we're not going to get it all, and that once you've done that, the hope is in a site that's less contaminated, the hope is you do whatever is practicable to remove and reduce the source material so that monitored natural attenuation over time will restore the site to meet standards. And we have lots of examples where that has worked effectively. So it's not a hope, or it's not a notional idea. It actually does work. And depending on the contaminant, there are a lot of degradation processes that often do help to degrade contaminants at a site after we've removed most of the source material. And we do get to where we're trying to get to. Again, for the reasons I said earlier, we're not likely to get to those standards at this site, but that doesn't mean that that we don't believe that there should still be some form of either active or something certainly beyond natural attenuation at this site. And we're working on our review of the remedial action plan now, and when that's prepared, obviously it'll be shared with everyone.
This may be a good site to utilize in whatever research is going on in destruction. Thank you.
Don?
Yes, thanks, Chris. Good discussion on the remedial action plan. I actually had a chance to review it a couple of weeks ago, the addendum. It looks like they evaluated sort of a pump and treat option with some barriers, and again, as Mike was indicating, because it's essentially infeasible, I guess, in their opinion, to get the background levels back down to ambient groundwater quality standards. They basically abandoned that concept and went back to the monitored natural attenuation. So after all of that, they're back to where they proposed back a year ago almost. But I did find some things in there that I didn't understand why they were proposing. They propose a barrier, a groundwater barrier or a collection system. I can't really tell. It's called a hydraulic control system up along the DW highway and then coming down the sort of the side of the site. And they dismissed that because they said that there was too much conflict with property that has been recently developed in that area. So they're talking about those small retail buildings that were recently built, and I was happy to find an email from, I don't know when it was a couple of years or two ago, and it's from Kate Emma Schlosser at your office, that she indicated that the presence of buildings and paved surfaces does not preclude the possibility of remediation. Because I asked that question, I said, maybe we should be holding back on the development of those properties until this remediation plan is in place so that we know it doesn't conflict. But the development went ahead, and of course, this is exactly what they're using as one of the excuses for not proposing to move forward with that, which is kind of unfortunate. And then there's a graphic in here, one of the figures, figure 5-1. It shows contours of PFOA, and the two contours it shows it being the highest, which is just between the St. Gobain property and the Merrimack River. The contour values are 5,000 and 2,000 nanograms per liter, and that's based on testing conducted in August of 2018. And I don't know why they're using that, because I mean, I think everybody remembers numbers as high as 62,000, and I want to say there was something even over 200-something thousand of PFOA in the groundwater. So I don't know. It doesn't say these are averages, but I certainly don't understand why they're looking at just the August 2018 or the fourth quarter 2018 samples. But and I do agree. It doesn't make sense to not want to remediate something because you can't get it down to the ambient groundwater standards. I'd be thrilled if they brought it down from 50,000 to 1,000 or something, and then do M&A from that point on. But to give M&A a little bit of a kickstart, there's some highly concentrated groundwater that's revealed in their graphics, and I think it's even higher than what they're showing. And it looks to me like a barrier would need to be placed probably along the railroad down between St. Gobain's property in the Merrimack River, because that's the contamination you want to catch and block and treat. Putting a barrier up against the roadway, you know, it's preventing the groundwater from the west that's moving east, but that's not the highly contaminated groundwater. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I'm sure your staff is reviewing that, and hopefully they'll ask those same questions. I just wanted to put that out there. You know, obviously it would set a bad precedent to allow somebody to not try to remediate actively because it's just too contaminated. It would suggest that other properties, if you're going to contaminate something, you better contaminate it as much as you can so you can get a free pass and not have to remediate it, which is ridiculous. So I'm pleased to hear, you know, that the DES did not find this to be something that they were hoping for. So, and I second that opinion tremendously. So I just wanted to put that out there. I guess I don't have a question, but I just wanted to get that on record. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks, Don.
Anybody else? Mindy, go ahead.
So following up on Representative Rung's question about the trends that you see in the wells, the private wells, I think it would be helpful to the commission to hear either from Andy or whoever you think is appropriate about the groundwater monitoring. That, you know, we may not have enough data in the private wells, but at least I'm sure you have enough in the monitoring wells that the companies had to install to understand what those trends are. And that would be, I think, very helpful for us to understand from at least like the closest wells to the facility, and that they're installed with, you know, the correct procedures and things. And we should be able to analyze quite a bit of data, I would think, over the years for that analysis. And we at least have a good idea of what's happening to the system.
Yeah, that's hard to say. I mean, I think we're really talking about two different things, though. I actually think as we get deeper into the discussion on the RAP and we get some written material out there, would probably come a time when it would be appropriate to have Andy come and address the commission to talk in broader terms about the remedial action plan and how we're, you know, what our comments are on that and what we're anticipating. As far as trends on the site, the problem is that some of the contamination is so high at the site, and it really represents very likely, you know, contaminated soils that serve as a continuing source, and even just pockets of groundwater, if you will, that serve as a source of further contamination to groundwater. That I'm not sure really that I'm not sure that a trend discussion would be that helpful or meaningful, but I won't judge that. You know, I'll certainly talk to Andy, and I think again, it would probably be helpful because the reason I say it's two different things, what we see in terms of the atmospheric deposition of these materials and their impacts on groundwater and drinking water over a very large, you know, many square mile area is really different. It's like a totally different site than the area on the site where, yes, there were certainly undoubtedly aerial deposition from the emissions, but also specific releases of materials that were probably what we would call a more conventional release where you spill a liquid, you know, material or something like that, as opposed to emitting it to the air. So it's really kind of apples and oranges, but I do think it would be helpful to have Andy come and talk a little bit about the site proper and what we know from our site investigation work that's been done there, and then where we're headed with the RAP. So I appreciate the question, and we can certainly do that.
Do they have to install off-site monitoring wells though too?
I'm not aware. I mean, there's some monitoring wells that are not technically on the site. They're in some areas just off the edge of the site, I believe, but not like scattered throughout the study area, if that's what you mean. Really, the line share, really all the data that we have in the aerial deposition area is from existing drinking water wells. We don't have a network of monitoring. I mean, it's just such a big area. We don't have, and that doesn't mean there won't be, and there won't be monitoring wells that are established as part of development of the groundwater management permit that exist far afield from the facility. But right now, I don't believe we have, any meaningful number of monitoring wells installed by the company in areas far afield from the site proper.
Do they have the extent of the plume delineated?
Well,
The groundwater plume?
well, it depends which plume
I mean,
you're
any of
talking
that, just more distal from,
Are you talking about locally around the site proper or the whole aerial deposition?
I want to get away from the industrial releases that happen right proximal to the site to understand better what is going on more distally from the site, so we can get an idea of, of what the continued increase in concentrations might be in the offsite, the more far offsite private wells. So just, it's not steady state, I'm sure, anywhere. And, the soil that has been contaminated by the air emissions is going to continue to supply through infiltration, increasing concentrations to the groundwater and the drinking water. So I just think it might be helpful if we, ignore well, I still want to know about that, but the more proximal is different, as you say, from the more distal, and the more distal would also be, I think, helpful for us to understand what's going on. So in any way that we can do that, if we don't have enough data from the private wells, I understand that, but if there's any other wells that we think are farther away from the site that we know that we can look at seasonal or whatever fluctuations. I remember Joe Ayat was talking about seasonal fluctuations. So there must be some data available that's.
Well, we're certainly, as part of, the groundwater management, this is going to be a groundwater management permit like none other we've ever had, right? And we candidly don't really know what that's going to look like right now, and trying to sort out how we accomplish that and what the magnitude is still an issue of discussion and debate. And it's going to take some time to sort that out. We've taken statewide, I think we must be approaching like 15,000 drinking water well samples for PFAS since we started this. And, the sheer magnitude of it and size is such that, we haven't had an opportunity to go back and get a lot of repeat data, right? So it's going to take some time to sort that out. There'll be certainly work that we do, but also I think work that that the company will have to do under its remedial action plan and groundwater management permit. And where we probably do at least is to the extent that we have some wells that have been impacted in public water systems with the influent sampling to their treatment systems, that will start to provide some trend data over time, because those systems would be required to sample periodically. So it's a whole big universe of different sources of potential data that will help to fill in some gaps here. But we have a long way to go, because for many of these wells that we sampled, we've got one data point, which is great. You want to make sure you know whether someone might be getting exposed to contaminated water, but really doesn't help you very much when it comes to evaluating trends. And we don't know, we won't know for a long time what those trends are going to be, because as you say, it's not like a fixed event. It's not like we had a spill back in 2007 and now we're monitoring its migration. We had air emissions that occurred from very likely the mid 1980s through through certainly in the higher levels through about 2000 or 2000, and then continued at lower levels all the way through till 2016 and 7, until they got the RTO set up. So, that is a really long record of releases, and it's going to behave differently in areas of the aquifer and areas of the geographic area that are, and we do see some, Jeff Martz did a lot of early work and recognized that where we had higher elevations in the terrain, which tend to be associated with areas where maybe increased rainfall might occur, but also areas in those same areas where the thickness of the overburden is much less, and it's a lot closer to the bedrock surface. We do see some trends that suggest that those bedrock wells that are completed in those areas tend to have higher concentrations than in areas where maybe we have a thick overburden that can mitigate the migration of those contaminants that get deposited from aerial deposition. So there will be a lot to learn over many years here, and I'm sure we will. But it's just we've never had a study area of a site anywhere near this size.
Yeah, thank you. Just real quick, I just wanted to point out Merrimack Village District has on the website mbdwater.org. We've been tracking PFOA, all the 4 regulated compounds, which really PFOA is the only one in violation. But we've been doing monthly testing on all of our wells basically since back in 2016. With the exception of wells 4 and 5, because those were offline during that time for several years. But there's a good database there. There's a lot of variability in the results. You have different, they can change by a factor of 50% basically from one test month to the next. And again, this is all sand and gravel, and most private wells are bedrock. So I don't know that there's necessarily a correlation there, but the link on the website's a little tricky to find. Maybe what I'll do is I'll send you the link if it's worth anything to your staff to look at any correlations. At least you know that that exists, and maybe you can make some correlations with that. So I'll send that off to you.
Yeah, that'd be really helpful. I appreciate that.
Okay. Any other questions for Mike? If not, I would say, Don, that data is really helpful. It's it's by the month and raw water data with wells 4 and 5 being in close proximity to Saint-Gobain plant. It's like our canary in the mine. So, hopefully we'll get an update from you at some point soon on those numbers. Mike, I had one thought when you were talking about people who are declining water line connections. Since our state rebate system rebates poets at about half the level of water line connections, or at half the level, I wonder if we can have Saint-Gobain offer poets to those people. We've gone back to 2016 in water line connections, and I understand people are concerned about having to pay monthly water bills. When we looked at it back in that era, really the average water bill is close to what it costs a home well owner, except they're not aware of the electricity charge, and those expenses tend to hit every 10 years or so, and they're very big, so people tend to think of it as almost free water, but the average is about the same. But it seems to me, if that's the barrier to people getting remediation at home, that desire to not be paying a water bill, that we ought to ask Saint-Gobain to offer them poets. They're not as expensive, and that's the barrier. Seems reasonable.
My recollection is I don't think that that's required under the consent decree. I mean, the idea is that if you look at the numbers, it's even under the best of circumstances, it's almost always considerably more expensive for the company to extend water main and connect people to water. So when they get over that hump and they decide that's what is going to happen in a given neighborhood, that's what they want the remedy to be, and that I think is reasonable. So if they spend the substantial funds to get a water main extension, get a water line down the street, offer people fully paid connections to the water main, I believe under the terms of the consent decree, you're going to get that offer, and if you don't accept it, then the company is not required to do anything else beyond that. Because otherwise, I think in a way that could backfire too, because we believe a water main connection, a water line connection, is the superior remedy. It's the most reliable. Once you're connected to a public water system, that water system has duty under the law to provide water that meets drinking water standards to you as long as you're a customer. Whereas, you know, with a poet, you know, we don't know if people are going to let the company come back in to maintain it, if they're going to bother to maintain it, or if they're going to shut it off, which is, you know, easy to do with the turn of a valve. So we don't see it as, we see it as inferior to a water line connection. We allow it because it's a practical thing that can work, and when it's done right, it can be very safe and appropriate. But we want to encourage extension of water mains wherever it can occur practicably. And if all of a sudden you say, yeah, you're going to need to spend all the money to get the water line in there, the much greater amount of money to get a water line in there and connect people. But if anybody doesn't want to, you got to give them a poet anyways and maintain it forever. That's just not, I don't see that as a particularly appropriate way to deal with our responsible parties, whether it's Saint-Gobain or anybody else at another site. I understand the sentiment, but I think I'm trying to give you an idea why it was negotiated that way.
All right, any other questions for Mike? If not, Leanne, why don't you proceed?
All right, good afternoon. I'll start out with an update about the Merrimack cancer investigation. Dartmouth and HHS have identified and invited members to participate on the project steering committee, scientific advisory board, and community advisory board to help guide the study design. We're in the process of starting to schedule those meetings. The Dartmouth team continues to work on the initial study designs, which will be refined by input from the committee and boards. Dartmouth is working with HHS and DES to identify what environmental data are available for review and analysis. And there was a meeting on February 16th to review work that was previously completed, review what data might be available, and discuss the project plans moving forward. And that meeting was with Dartmouth, Health and Human Services, and Environmental Services. And we're planning on additional meetings to continue those discussions. In terms of the ATSDR PFAS guidance for clinicians, the ATSDR updated their guidance for clinicians on January 18th. The New Hampshire specific guidance developed by HHS is based on ATSDR's old guidance from 2019, and we have been working with Dartmouth to evaluate what updates are needed to our New Hampshire specific guidance. And that's all I have. If anybody has any questions.
Leanne, it's Rosemary. If you could just send me that report, that would be great. I can put it into the minutes.
Yes, I will do that. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions for Leanne before we move on to our legislative update? If not, Maureen?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. I'm reporting from Concord right now. I had a series of meetings with the speaker this morning, so I hope my bandwidth is acceptable to everyone on the call. A couple of you froze up earlier, so I hope I'm okay. So, legislative update. Starting with our 2023 chart, one bill on that is still in play, and that's House Bill 398. Representative Rung is the prime sponsor. Last I knew, that bill has been referred now to the Senate Commerce Committee, and we are awaiting a hearing. So that's your 2023 chart. Okay, 2024 chart. I tried to categorize everything to be as succinct and quick and clear as possible, so hopefully this will work. We have 7 bills on that chart that have had full House action completed, and I'll go over that. 1 with final action, so it's done. 1 has been referred to Finance, so it passed the full House, referred to Finance. And then 2, I don't know what the status is at this point. They're still in committee. So let's start with those that have had full House action so far. In the ought to pass with amendment category, it's House Bill 1114 and House Bill 1171. Those are extending commissions. In the ought to pass category, House Bill 1415. Interim study category, House Bills 1089 and 1170. In the ITL category, House Bill 1707 and House Bill 1393. And the chart has been updated to reflect my report. If you want to refer to that, it was updated last night with all of the latest. Final action. And that was the resolution, House Resolution, so that's HR 28. It only needed to pass the House, which it did on a voice vote last month. So that's done. Referred to Finance. This category means that it passed the full House, but because it has a fiscal note of significance, it was referred by the Speaker to the House Finance Committee, which is where it is now in Division 1. That's House Bill 1649. And frankly, I was hoping to have a guest speaker on this bill because its sponsor, Representative Ebel, is just across the hall here, but she's in another meeting and can't make it. But the work session on this bill in House Finance, Division 1, is coming up. It's March 13th at 1:30. So if anybody is able to be there, it's very helpful to Finance Committee members to have supporters there to discuss the importance of this bill. I know several of you, including myself for a long time, were there for the bill when it was in Commerce. And I have to say, as a member of Finance, though Division 3, but still, it's very important that the same level of support be with a bill in Finance. So don't underestimate your significance when it gets referred to a second committee. It's still very important. And again, that work session's March 13th at 1:30. The appropriations in that bill are probably over 3 years, close to $800,000, I think is what the fiscal note has reflected. Okay. And then the last two bills, which I'm not entirely sure where we are with them because they're in committee still, and they haven't had exec sessions or moved to the House floor. And that is House Bill 1613 and Senate Bill 413. And with that, I will conclude my legislative report, unless I see Representative Ebel comes from her meeting and is able to give us further information on her bill, House Bill 1649. That concludes my report. Also want to make mention that Representative Rich LaSalle's couldn't be here today. He had mentioned that to me yesterday. So I thought I would mention that today, that he should have an excused absence from the committee because he mentioned his absence. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Don, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Representative Moody, thanks for your summary. I just wanted to ask if you could forward that table and maybe if Rosemary can put that in the minutes. I know that was very helpful in the past, you know, because I wasn't quite following exactly what the purpose of all of those individual bills were. And I know that table you've been kind of, and I'm hoping you're still keeping that updated. It sounds like you are. That's been very helpful to see that listed out in the minutes in the past. So that would be great if you can do it. I appreciate that.
Sure. So would you like for me to share it with you again after this meeting or during this meeting, you're saying?
At least put it in the minutes, I was thinking, of
Okay.
this meeting. Yeah.
Yeah,
Representative Rung.
Yeah, I can, if you could just send me the link again. I think I have it, but just, I had to redo a lot on my computer. I lost some stuff, but if you could send me the link, I'll just do a screenshot of that section and include it in the minutes, paste it in.
It's a Google Doc or something, I think.
It
right?
is.
And
Sure.
yeah, but thank you. I'm a co-sponsor on Representative Ebel's bill, and I was extremely pleased with the progress it made in Commerce Subcommittee and the strong support that it had. But I do want to underscore what you said about the importance of communicating that to the House Finance Committee, Division 1. I know that Representative Dunn and I are going to be in our own committee that day. I'm hoping we can break away to testify, but I would encourage everyone on this call to contact people on the Division 1 committee. I believe Representative Leishman is the chair of that, isn't he? Representative Mooney and Representative McGuire, Dan McGuire is the vice chair. I mean, to my recollection.
That is correct.
Even an email from each of us, just speaking personally, that as a member of this commission, that we strongly support that bill, that it will go a long way to reducing PFAS that ends up in our environment. I think that would go a long way. And if anybody needs their contact information, if you go to the New Hampshire General Court website under House and under Finance, under Division 1, it will give a link with the hyperlinks to each member's email.
And that's House Bill 1649, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And that's the only bill with sessions coming up where we ought to weigh in at the present time.
I think so. I think that's actually the most important bill too. The other ones, we've had, Representative Dunn and I have had several come through our committee, and they haven't had any opposition. It just, this one I think is, because it does have a fiscal note, because it's more sweeping in a way that it's really, it's a product ban for of certain products containing PFAS. So it's more sweeping. I think it's more relevant to all corners of the state, and I think it will bring a lot of momentum to other regulation we have to decrease PFAS in our environment.
Okay, with nothing else, I'd like to go back to the minutes of the last meeting. And if there are any comments, and if not, we'll entertain a motion to approve.
I can make that motion.
Motion by Rosemary, is there a second? Second by Don, I guess. All those in favor, please raise your hand so we can see them. And any opposed? And I don't know what, Ron, your camera's not on. You can clarify at some point, and we'll clarify that for our record in minutes. So that passes. Is there any new business anyone would like to discuss? If not, it is 3:22, and I'll take a motion to adjourn. Motion by Gary, is there a second? Second by Laureen. All those in favor say aye, or raise your hand, I'm sorry. And aye. That passes. Everyone have a great sunny afternoon, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.